Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
We need a little controversy because it feels so empty without me. I said this looks like a job for me, so everybody just follow me. We need a little controversy because it feels so empty without me. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la.
Back, Scott.
Okay, everyone, welcome to the TRRA Training and Development webinar for October. This evening, we will be joined by none other than Chris Pollock, World Rugby Cup referee and all-around top bloke from the Bay, and our very own referee education officer, Derek Summers. They're calling in from Denver, Colorado, where they're up working the World Rugby Combine at the moment. So, boys, are you on the line with me?
Yeah, we're here. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I've got you loud and clear, Derek. Chris, you there, mate?
Yeah, I'm here. It's actually nice to hear someone with a normal accent, to be fair, Scotty.
Yeah, look, hey, I agree, Chris. Look, first question, what is it about the Bay that produces such good rugby referees? Clearly, you know, there's something in the water down there.
Mate, definitely. You're not wrong there. It's just such a great place to live. Very chilled out, relaxed. Don't get too excited about too much.
Yeah, that's the way. Hey, look, thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule this week to share your insights on the Scrum with our referees down here in Texas. And actually all across the country. We've got about 70-odd people who have signed up, and hopefully they'll all be on tonight to listen to your thoughts around the Scrum. So I'll waste no more time. We'll jump straight into it, and it's up to and over to you, Derek Summers.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So, Chris, just a little background about yourself here. We'll go to the third slide. Scotty, you're in control of the webinar.
Yeah, you got the slide there, mate. Can you see it there?
Yeah.
We're just having technical difficulties on here. We're getting there, though.
I'll continue to talk while you guys get caught up. Chris Pollock, international referee, as we said. I believe he started refereeing when he was about 26 years old, rather by accident. Got injured during a game because he's a rather slight fella, and obviously did pretty well at it, and was invited over to the World Cup 2011, where I believe he was an assistant referee. Again, British and Lions Tour 2013, and then had 7 appointments at the 2015 World Cup, over 70 Super Rugby matches, and joined one of the exclusive clubs with over 200 first-class matches down in New Zealand. I think that's pretty close to it. Chris, anything else to add there?
No, it's pretty good summation.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. And now he's joined us at the Major League Rugby as a referee coach, and it's awesome to have him on board.
Yeah. Scott, is everyone seeing the PowerPoint? Are we aware if everybody's seeing the PowerPoint? Are we just on this homepage? Or are we moving on to the second slide?
The slide that I have up is the little bio slide. So if you're seeing it out there in webinar land, let us know, mate. Write a comment.
Okay. I guess on presenter role, it's all different. But anyway, I've got it here, so no problem. So yeah, just a little bit about Chris. He's from the Bay. He's from Hawke's Bay. Like you said, was a match official at 2011 World Cup, and as well as the 2013 British and Irish Lions Tour. 2015 World Cup, where he refereed a few matches and AR'd as well. And then I see their 70 Super Rugby matches. So happy to have Chris. Like you said, he's been one of our coaches for MLR for the last season. He was my coach for the first 3 games. Poor guy. I don't know if I would put that upon anyone that I know, but yeah, and he was so happy with the first season, or I guess wasn't disappointed enough with the first season that he signed on for season 2. I'm not sure if that's official, if I can legally say that yet, but we'll have that out there. So happy to have Chris on. Chris, what are we doing in Denver right now?
So at the moment we're at a thing called the America's Combine. So we've got players from South America, so Uruguay, Brazil, Chile. There's a couple of guys from Canada and some college players, and basically they're just getting put through their paces for the week. And then at the end of that week, the MLR teams are looking at who they like and what kind of places they need to fill their rosters, and they'll get hopefully some of these guys will get picked up for contracts.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, it's been a really intense week. A couple days ago, we do finish this with a match as well. So basically, Chris and I have kind of just been working together. We spent a lot of time the last 2 weeks. So I feel bad for you. You've had to be with me in Uruguay, where we got the meat sweats all the whole time, and then now we're here in Denver, doing a lot of training, a lot of talking about everything from positioning to setting up the game, time and space, all sorts of stuff. So definitely a enjoyable time for me to have your insight as well. We'll move on to the next slide. So tonight we're going to talk about scrums, everybody's favorite setup, everybody's favorite set piece throughout rugby. This is just a picture here. We'll just go through these real quick. This is kind of your basic setup of a scrum, where everyone's pushing straight and everyone's doing what they're supposed to do. Heads are in gaps. Alignment is good. We'll go to the next slide. And then we look at kind of your typical setup for loose heads and tight heads, where, one loose head's on an angle, tight head's on an angle. Next slide. And then the 3, here you've got hooker, tight head, and flanker kind of attacking the hooker and the driving on an angle. And then we move on to kind of your classic wheel setup, where an 8-man would be involved. And then you typically, when you're going around the corner. And then the last slide is probably what most of us see on a daily Saturday, where no one's really driving straight. Maybe the hookers, just from poor setup, maybe not necessarily on purpose, but just poor technique. So Chris, currently in the world rugby, scrums across the board seem to be one of the major issues with referees. Why do you think that is?
Look, I think the scrum's a massively complex area, and that's half the problem. Is we try to referee like it's really complex, instead of actually trying to take a step back and making the whole process a lot more simpler for ourselves. So I know for me, throughout my career, like when I first started, I'm a pretty detailed kind of person. So at the beginning of my career, I wanted to be right in everything I did. So I tried to understand all the ins and outs of the scrum. And as I progressed through my career, I realised I'm never going to get it all right. It's a deep, dark art, scrummaging, and half the guys playing in the front row don't even know what's happened when it collapses. So for a skinny little halfback trying to work it out, it ended up being a bit of a waste of time. So the biggest probably thing I learned was to try to make what I'm looking for really, really simple, and have a very simple process and follow that. And instead of trying to get it right all the time, just accept the fact that there's going to be some scrums that I have no idea what's happened, and some days where 2 front rows just don't fit, and it's actually nothing to do with me. It's just the fact that they don't fit, and don't try to be perfect. If you can get away with kind of 80% ball in, ball out, you've probably had a pretty good day at scrum.
Well, unless you're in the MLR, then we just hope for 60%, or we just hope for 50. I don't know how you feel about that, Scott, but yeah, 60% was a good.
I agree with Chris.
60% was a good day for me.
Mark, I believe.
What's that?
I believe I was up around 85%.
Probably, yeah, probably not me. I was not fortunate enough. Yeah, just over your career, you've probably refereed, Chris, 4, 5, maybe even 7 or 8 different types of cadences. Do you think your approach was always the same throughout your career as a referee, or did you kind of look at it try to ref the whole scrum at once before you kind of came into the simplified approach?
I suppose I've started to try to see everything, and there's that classic saying, you can't see the wood for the trees. And I reckon that's the biggest issue when we try to referee scrums. We try to look for everything and we end up seeing nothing. And I guess that was probably me up for about half, if not 3/4 of my career, until I had an opportunity to sit down with a gentleman called Mike Cron, who's actually the All Blacks forwards coach now, was the scrum coach. And he really challenged us in New Zealand around, well, what are we looking at and how good can you actually see things if you're actually trying to see everything? And that really changed my approach and my thinking around scrums.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we were down in Uruguay, that seemed to be a big focus area for the whole group of referees. And we sat down on one of the days and we talked about kind of just simplifying the approach and maybe looking at the scrum piece by piece. Can you just kind of touch a little bit on that specifically, where you look at one player and then go from there?
Yeah. So I'll talk through what I developed and probably what I talk to most referees about around scrum time. So I have 3 plans. So I call them Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. So Plan A is what, when I first walk out onto the field, that's what I'd be starting with. And Plan A has 4 parts to it. So setup or alignment. And basically what that means is I want to make a mark and I'm going to get my hookers to stand to the left of the mark. And the reason why I'm really hot on alignment and everyone being in their own space is, if you think about, if you get 2 props that come down and they are head on head or moving their head, when you say set, somebody's going to end up on an angle. So in New Zealand, we have the same. It's a saying, a game of chicken. So if you go back to that slide, Scotty. So if you see now that the one previous, keep going, the first one, that one, yep. So if you see in that setup there, each of the front arrows, they're all in their own space. Okay, so everyone can push straight. As soon as you get 2 of the arrows pointing together, for them to get into a space, somebody's got to change, and you will naturally end up with an angle. So ideally, yep, exactly like that. So ideally what you want to be doing is having your hooker come to the left of the mark, the other hooker go to the left of the mark. So when you say crouch, everybody's going to come down and be naturally in their own space. And I talk about in my scrum process deal breakers. So if I say crouch and I see somebody come down and they're moving their head, or they end up with their head on head, for me that is a deal breaker, because you're going to automatically end up with somebody on an angle and your chances of scrum success are going to get reduced. So I would always stand them up, start them again, force the loose head to be on the outside of the tight head, get the tight head on the inside, and be really, really strong and dogmatic about that. So that's the first part of Plan A, is alignment. The next part is around stability. So when stability is like a catchphrase that gets used in scrummaging all the time. And for me, when we first used to talk about what's stability, I always used to think to myself, well, what does that actually mean? And I got it to the point where I needed to be able to describe it to somebody. So for me, stability means no movement. So when I look at the scrum, I don't want to see any movement. And I probably reduced it even more to just looking at feet. So once everybody's feet have stopped moving, therefore I know I've got stability. So just delve into that a little bit more detail. So if Derek and I were having a pushing competition and I had my hands on Derek's shoulders and he had his hands on my shoulders, I know Derek's a very powerful man, but if I had my feet set and firmly planted on the floor and Derek was still moving his feet and someone said go, I'd probably win. But if Derek could get his feet planted flat on the floor and set, and I had my feet planted flat on the floor and set, I'd say he'd win more times than not. But at least we'd get an even pushing competition. So for me, stability is massive, and it's waiting, especially between the bind and the set. So once you say bind, you need to give people time to adjust their feet. And if you're saying set while they're still adjusting their feet, I reckon the chances of your scrum success are going to dramatically reduce. You might be lucky and you might get a good hit and you might get ball in, ball out, but the chances are you're probably not. So that's the first two. The third one is bind. So for me, it's checking on the side that I'm standing that I physically can see the person or the two props in front of me that they've bound in the correct place. So loose head is on the back of the jersey. Doesn't have to be a long bind, but as long as it's on the back, and the tight head is off the arm. Finally, I just want them to push straight. So for me, that means they've got to go forward before they can go around. And inevitably, or generally, if it's going to turn, it'll be the non-feeding team that turn it, and they'll turn it on the spot. So if you see a scrum that wheels on the spot or goes around, turns on the corner, that's probably a penalty against the non-feeding team. So that's how I start. That's my plan A. So the very first scrum, that's all I'm looking for, those four things. Now, I know that might sound very simplistic, but for me, I think I was probably lucky because the majority of times when I was refereeing using this process, I was dealing with people that had reasonable good technique. And I understand there could be people listening here that are doing college or schoolboy stuff where you're not going to always get great technique. So I would say, like if you see somebody with their head below their hips, clearly that's an issue. You got to fix that. But for me, those things should stand out and shouldn't be necessarily part of a process because they're going to stand out pretty easily. So the first couple of scrums, that's all I'm worrying about. Now, if I get ball in and ball out, I actually don't care. Like that's as simple as I want my scrum process to be. If I'm getting ball in and ball out, if I'm having to reset a few scrums, I then am going to switch to Plan B, and Plan B is focusing on one person. So earlier I said that saying around wood for the trees. So the reason why I want to switch to one person and just watch that one person is because I don't think I'm good enough to be able to look at 6 people and see the pictures I need to see. So when I shift to one person, I actually don't care whether I look at the loose head or I look at the tight head, but the one thing that I'm really clear on and I understand is what do I want to see from my loose head and what do I want to see from my tight head. So I think Derek's going to show some slides a bit later of what a good tight head looks like and what a good loose head looks like. But essentially for me, I have like 4 to 5 things that I'll check off for each person. So if I'm looking at my loose head, what I want is when I say crouch, so obviously I'm still working off Plan A, but when I say crouch, I want to see that they're set up level. So their head is above their hips. And when I say engage, they hit level. So they don't hit down, they hit level. Okay, I want to see that his bind is definitely not on the elbow and he's got his outside shoulder up. I mean, his outside elbow up. And I also need to see that he hits square, so it doesn't go in on an angle. So all I'm doing is looking at that one person. So if I look at that one person and I can tick the boxes for those 4 or 5 things because I see that they've done them right and it collapses, I'm penalising the loose head. Okay, it's a process of elimination, and as I said a little bit earlier, you're not going to be right all the time, but I reckon 80% of the time when you use a process of elimination, if one person's done it right and it collapses, surely it's got to be the other person that's doing something wrong. Likewise with the loose head, okay, what I'm looking for him is that he hits up, slightly up. He's got a long bind on the back and that he stays straight so he doesn't step out and head in.
Yeah.
So that would be my plan B. And then if it's still turning to shit and I can't solve my issues that way, my trying to get a gap at the beginning of the scrum goes out the window and I get them pre-engaged and we try to get ball in, ball out and go. I'd rather have a day where we get some ball in, ball out than be resetting scrums all day. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. I mean, just from working with you in the last 2 weeks, it's really simplified the whole process. You've recently taken on, as we talked about, you're a coach in MLR, but you also coach us at coach referees at the international level and in New Zealand. It's one of those things that you commonly see when referees are having issues with scrums. Typically has to do with the setup, or is it an issue afterwards?
You generally can find it in setup. So like when you're watching, like I often see issues where guys are proceeding when you've got head on head.
Yeah.
So automatically there's an issue. So you can see
Yeah.
one of the props before you say set, you can see their heads moving. So you know that they're not in a great position. Or when you say bind, you can still see people's feet moving. So you can tell they're not actually comfortable in the position they are. And then you're asking them for, at the senior level, 700-800 kgs of weight to go through. So again, yeah, it's all around.
It's all about setup, really. I mean,
yeah.
You know, nowadays, you know, even at the professional level or the lower level, people talk about dominance and rewarding dominance. You know, is it about rewarding dominance at that level, or is it more about rewarding legal dominance and picking out, you know, what's the difference between cheating and dominating or being legal?
100%. I mean, you can't reward someone that is dominant because they cheated.
Yeah.
You know, like it's just an unfair advantage. And I always like to look at the scrum as I control everything up until we go set, and then the players control it from there. So that's why I'm really massive on setup. And if you follow, I believe if you follow some of those steps, you got more of a chance of being able to see when someone's illegal than legal.
For sure. I mean, do you think nowadays with the current setup, there's one specific player in the scrum that is, you know, can have more leeway than others, or is it just kind of depends on the team?
No, it definitely depends on the team. So I wouldn't say. I mean, it's an understanding that when a team is feeding, the opposition are going to try and put the pressure through the feeding team's tight head. So yeah, like I suppose the loose head of the feeding team is going to try and have a bit more of a field day.
Mm-hmm.
But you never know. It all comes down. And I mean, like sometimes people talk about doing a whole lot of homework on individuals, but they can get you in danger as well, like with a preconceived idea.
For sure.
Just trust your process and stick to it.
Absolutely. You know, we talked about a little bit last week about tight heads being kind of the anchor of the scrum. You know, what do you mean by that? And, you know, especially when a team has a strong tight head or a weak tight head, how can that be good or bad for that situation?
Well, I mean, without getting into too many details, the way a scrum's set up, it's always going to wheel, like it's naturally, sorry, not always, but it's naturally going to wheel with a loose head going up.
Yeah.
Just because of the mechanics of biomechanics of the scrum.
Yeah.
So it's easy for a loose head to have a go at the tight head.
For sure.
If the tight head's weak. And the whole idea of what the tight head's trying to do, if they want to stay square, he's got to control the loose head.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, in a nutshell.
I mean, pretty much. You know, we have a number of coaches on this call tonight, and you know, they're always interested to hear kind of a referee's perspective. Is there something that coaches can do to kind of make, it's not really their job to make our lives easier, but is there something that coaches can kind of think about to maybe improve their scrum or you know, make life simpler for their team?
Like, I don't get me wrong, I'm no expert when it comes to scrums. Like, I've never been in the front row, and there's potentially guys on this call that will have far more knowledge when it comes to scrummaging than me. All I'm talking about is controlling
the controllables.
What I can control is the setup. So if I was going to a coaching or going to a coach, the one thing I'd be saying is when they're training, understand that a referee under my kind of thinking is going to be slow through their cadence, and they're going to be looking for stability at each phase. So when you're going through your stuff at your trainings, if you're rushing your calls, you're probably not helping your players because they need to get used to probably what they're going to get on a Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, just in terms of your pre-match routine with the team, can you just kind of go through what your typical pre-match would be? Say you were refereeing a schoolboys match this weekend, which I know you still kind of referee. What would that pre-match be in terms of the front row chat?
My front row chat would probably be no different, whether it being a schoolboy game or whether it being a Super Rugby game or a Test match. So I try to just touch on the 4 points that I talked about in my plan A. So I talk about alignment. So I'll say to them, I'm going to make a mark. I need both hookers to sit to the left of the mark. When I say crouch, I need you to come down in your own space.
Yeah.
If I see you head on head, I'm going to stand you up, start you again. Next one is I'll be looking for stability. For me, that means no movement of your feet before I go to the next call. talk about the bind, talk about pushing straight. So those, I just touch on those 4 things very quickly, move on. Again, I don't want to say too much, and all I'm really talking about are the things that I can control and the things that I know that I'll execute.
Yeah, perfect. Just another question from the group here. What sort of self-study can a referee do to further their understanding of the scrum?
Yeah, great question. So the thing that you can do is, so as I talked about, when you're watching scrums, just ask yourself around those 4 things. Do you see the referee do them, or do you not? And just try to get better at understanding or seeing when people's feet have stopped moving and how stable that is. Also, trying to understand if you have to switch to plan B. So you're going to look at a loose head or you're going to look at a tight head individually. What does that picture look like for you of when the technique is right?
Yeah.
And really getting used to being able to see that in a snapshot. Because let's face it, it's hard. It happens just like that. And it's got to become instinctive.
Yeah. And most of us on the call probably never played in the front row. And that's always been the most difficult thing for all of us.
Yep. So can you go to that slide where you've got the picture of the loose and the tight head?
Go to the next slide, Scott. We'll come back to engagement. Scotty.
Sorry, I just want to talk to you about your Plan C. We had a question about Plan C.
Yeah.
So they're asking the question: what do you mean by getting a preset?
Pre-engage. So see how in this slide we've got up here, we've got them with a space on crouch and bind. I'd be going straight to saying you got to come closer. So they'll be pre-engaged. And look, I understand this probably goes against what our traditional assessors would say. You can't have pre-engagement. Well, if you've given 3 penalties or 4 penalties and you've reset 5 or 6 scrums and your day at scrum is turning into a mess, the one thing I do know is when scrums are poor in a game of footy, generally the rest of the game's poor. So you got to find a solution to be able to get ball in, ball out, so the players don't get frustrated at the fact that we're continually resetting all the time. It's just that's my thoughts. Again, you have to come to something you're comfortable with.
Thanks, Chris. Hopefully that answers your question, Brian Wolf. And we'll move on to the next slide. Here it comes.
Perfect.
Is this the one you're after?
Yeah. So like.
Sorry, our arrows moved here. Let me take over.
Don't worry about the angle. But like,
okay.
if you look at this, the setup of both loose head and tight head in this picture, like they're both really, really good. So ideally, you've got your loose head. You could argue that maybe he's overextended slightly, but he's on a slight angle up. He's got a really good bind on the tight head's back, and he's in a really good, strong position. The tight head exactly the same. He's got his feet well underneath him. He doesn't have his head below his hips, and he's bound on the loose head's back. So what you asking me before, sorry, what could referees do is really understanding that's the picture I want to see. So if I've switched to plan B and I'm looking at my loose head, I want to see that. Now, if I see him do exactly that, and then all of a sudden it collapses, well, I'm going to go the other way. Conversely, if I'm looking at my tight head, who I tended to look at because of what we talked about before about them being the anchor of the scrum, if I saw my tight head having good technique and then the loose head, or then the scrum collapsing, I'm probably switching and putting the focus on the loose head or penalising the loose head.
Yeah. In situations like this, a lot of referees seem to, and not just in scrum, but around the rest of the game, referees seem to be under the most pressure when the scrum's going to shit. Why do you think that is, and what are ways that referees can maybe deflect that pressure?
So we often talk about transferring the pressure to the players. So when we get, like, if you're confident in your process and confident in what you want to see, then all you need to be saying back to the players is exactly around that plan is go, I need to see this, this, and this from you. So if you're talking to the tight head, I need to see you hitting level. I need you with your bind on the other guy's back. And then it's their problem. If they can't fix it, it's not your problem. It's their problem. And then you go to the captain and go, this isn't my problem. This is their problem. You know, but we tend to think that it's our problem when we've got to solve it. Well, we don't have to solve it because we're not the ones in the scrum. All we got to do is make a decision. So that's probably how I'd be doing it.
That's pretty much it. I mean, in a nutshell, right? So yeah, this is our picture we were kind of talking about, like Chris was saying. You know, we got the binds, and then we were just looking at the angles here. This, I mean, keep in mind this is just a picture. So we got flat backs, we got good body position. You could argue the player in blue, maybe his feet are a little bit too far back, but this is your ideal picture, like he's saying. You know, if you had something where the body angles were shaped down, you'd obviously, you know, have issues with collapse or an unsuccessful scrum. But that's pretty much what we're looking for with this flat approach. So yeah, you know, just to talk about scrums in your career, you know, was there ever a time in your career where you had games where, you know, high profile or not, where it just wasn't working and you probably just wanted to get out of there? I mean, we've all been there where every time we have a knock on, you're like, oh, here we go. And nothing seems to be working. You know, is there any kind of moment in your career where
definitely
it just wasn't the greatest day in the scrum?
Yeah, plenty of times. Like these days where it doesn't matter how you know good you are, you're just going to have two teams that don't fit. So that and that was probably why I developed or tried to come up with my plan C, is because these days when you can't end up having great scrums just because two teams aren't fit. You might have a couple of players that just aren't good enough. And as I said, it's not necessarily always going to be your problem to try and solve. And I remember, like, I did the Crusaders Chiefs beginning of 2012, and I think I reckon we might have had 3 completed scrums in the whole game.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just a nightmare. And that was the turning point for me to say, "Geez, I've got to come up with something different here," because everyone just got frustrated. It got really niggly. So not only was I dealing with crap scrums, I was then dealing with players that were getting grumpy. You know, like that. So that there'd be pushes and shove, and for me, it all comes down to the fact that we couldn't get any set phase ball.
Yeah. You know, now with the current setup of the scrum with the crouch bind set, I mean, over the past like 5 or 6 years, we've had a couple of different changes. Do you think they're going to change it after the next World Cup? And if you were king for a day, you know, say you were in the position to make those changes, is there something specific you would change, or would you keep it as is?
I'd just let pre-engage.
Pre-engage.
Yeah. So it becomes a true pushing competition.
Pre-engage. I mean, it pretty much. If you look at games from like the 70s and 80s when it used to be that way, where the front rows would just come together, that's kind of what it was it not?
Yeah, but there wasn't anywhere near as much force in the engagement as what we've got now. So yeah, they'd come together with a bit of force, but it just ended up being a pushing competition.
Right.
Whereas today, like, because they train it so hard, there's massive impact on the set, and that's probably just the one other thing that I touch on is, you know, when you get two teams and they're pushing before the ball comes in, there's no issue with them pushing before the ball comes in if they're both pushing at a reasonably equal kind of amount, because you're not going to get much movement. But when they're pushing before the ball comes in and that's causing massive instability, then I think that's when you've got to step in and really put a stake in the ground around pushing early. Right. So, I mean, we had experience just the other day, Derek, at this combine when the combine team went and scrummed against Glendale, and it was basically just that they were just trying to show who was bigger than the other. Yeah. And until we stepped in and said, "Boys, you got to stop pushing until the ball comes in, or at least get it even," did we actually start to get some decent scrums. There was a lot more. There was a very PG version of what was actually said during that session. I can tell you, it was totally true as well.
It's pretty funny, actually. Yeah. So if we have any other questions from the group, feel free to get those in. I don't see too many, Scott. Do you have any from your side?
No, I haven't seen any other ones. The last one that came in was asking about, can you see the question board there, Derek, asking about techniques? Do your techniques change for lower level rugby or less experienced players? Did we touch on that one?
Yeah. I mean, it says here, as Jonathan points out, obviously at the higher levels, scrums are a lot easier. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that first phrase, but at the lower level, you get all kinds of techniques. What do you think you would handle that if you came up with situations with props that really have either no idea how to prop or they just haven't been coached how to prop?
Yeah. So I think scrums at any level present their own challenges. So when you obviously referee at the high level, you've got a lot more power and that, which brings its own challenges and guys that are very strong. When you come down the levels, that's where you start to run into issues with technique. And I think when you are starting to go down those levels and dealing with people with technique issues, the one thing you've always got to have in the front of your mind is safety. So, like if you think safety is an issue because of someone's technique, that's probably when I'd actually start to go more towards my plan C and get people closer to take the impact and therefore some of the potential issues away or with the lack of technique.
Yeah, for sure. Scott, you have anything on your end?
No, I think we've done our job tonight, boys. I just want to do a quick recap and see if we're all on the same page here. So we've got 4 parts to your first plan, Chris, and you're really focusing on the setup and the alignment, making sure props are owning their space. You want some stability, making sure that the feet aren't moving before you go on to the next step. Good binds, good legal binds, getting off the arm and making sure we've got binds on the backs. And that we're pushing straight, and it looks like a scrum and not a merry-go-round. Then if we're not having success there, we're going to move on to singling out one of the players and making sure they're hitting all their points. And then if we're not successful there and it all goes to custard, we're going to bring them nice and close together, get the ball in, get the ball out, and play some footy.
Pretty much.
Is that about right?
Yep.
Set up, slow cadence, patience at the scrum, put the pressure on the players. It's not your job to scrum correctly. So, Chris, it's been great to have you here in Denver. You get a break from me after Saturday. We've spent most of this whole month together. You're off to New Zealand for about 8 hours, and then you jump on a plane, 3 hours, and then you jump on a plane again. What's next for you?
I go to Tokyo, spend the week with Japan before they play the All Blacks. So that'll be quite exciting. Quite looking forward to that. And then go to Europe, spend a week with Georgia in Italy, then a week with Tonga and Wales, and a week with Fiji in Paris.
Yeah, perfect. Any predictions for the match this Saturday with the Americas team versus Glendale?
I'm picking it's going to be one side. I just hope the referee's up to it.
Guys, I've got a couple of questions coming in late. I'll just chuck them up there for you. We've got Alan out in Louisiana. How close would you allow the front rows to get before considering a free kick or resetting? Sometimes I see almost a full engagement with a little space on both sides with no issues. This is at the lower level. Any suggestions for those one-off situations?
So I just lost that last part of the question, mate. Say it again.
Okay, I'll just read it again. How close would you allow the front row players to get before considering a free kick or resetting?
Yeah, look, I mean, if everything's going okay, ideally you want to have shoulders off shoulders. So if you've got a prop with his head on someone's shoulder, that to me that's showing me shoulder off shoulder. So that's how you'd start. That's the idea of what you're trying to get, a shoulder off shoulder, and then as long as they're not touching, that gap's fine for me.
Okay, nice. Brad Cole has asked a question: what's a good way to communicate a penalty against illegal dominance?
I think the best way is whatever you're penalising, you verbalise. So it's probably quite a good question and a good point. Is instead of having a whole lot of different penalties that you give, try to stick to like 3 or 4 core penalties. So, like not pushing straight. So that's when either a tight head or a loose head doesn't push straight. So they either angle or whatever. So that covers off angling of our props. Not binding correctly would cover a binding issue. Collapsing would be like a prop who hits down or ends up going down on the floor. Wheeling the scrum is when they, but you could probably use not pushing straight as well. So outside of those kind of 3 or 4 key decisions that you make, you want to tie your communication to those 3 or 4 decisions. So yeah, I mean, again for me, making it simple, so tie it back to whatever is in your plan. So again, like if I see one of the 4 things that are missing in my plan on making the decision, I'll be relating it back to that at the beginning of my setup. If that makes sense.
Yep. We have another question from Pascal O'Reilly, I believe his name is. Do you allow pre-engagement before you get to plan C?
No, I'm trying to work on having a hit, because I think when you do get a hit and everybody's in a good stable platform to start with, so their feet have stopped moving and they're actually in a good position, I think that's when you actually get the best scrum, like the best contest. But if it's not working for whatever reason, that's what I'm probably 10 or 11 scrums into the game, and I haven't really had much success at getting ball out before I'm starting to look at going down that road, if I can't pinpoint it on one person.
Yeah. And then another question here from Brian Wolf. Is there any process for you when a new front row player enters the match as a substitute?
Great question. So for me, you've got to treat that as your first scrum of the game. Yeah. So when someone else comes in, you've got to forget about what's going on and you've got to go, right, I'm now restarting. And that's what I'd be doing.
Perfect.
And you might even, when the person comes on, if it's 60 minutes into the game, remind them about 1 or 2 of the key things that you said in the shed before the game. So it might be just a simple, mate, I need you to make sure you get your bind up and you stay straight.
Chris, just to follow up on that question, when a substitute player comes on into the front row, does he own the sins of his predecessor, or do you give him a clean slate?
Jeez. Difficult question.
You can say depends and we can move on.
No. Look, I think the situation where you might pin it straight on him is if you deem that that's because the team is poor and you've got Scrum A who are really dominant and really strong, and they've taken off a guy because they want to try to avoid getting a yellow card. Like you give the guy a fair crack, so you might let him have a scrum or 2, and then if it's still happening, then you're saying to the captain again, mate, the issue's not solved by this bloke, so he's wearing the same thing. It doesn't get sorted, someone's going to the bin.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, look, I think we've taken up enough of your time, Chris. I know that I really appreciate it. It's been an awesome hour. Listening to you share your knowledge. We're all out of questions. I think this would be a good time to wrap it up and let you guys go get some dinner and have a few quiet ones.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Chris, for joining us. Just a reminder, next week for the Houston and Austin folks, we'll be getting together and we'll be doing some live scrummaging with our local teams next week. So be prepared for that. Bring your whistles and we'll be able to run through a couple of live scrums and just see how it goes. You know, think about Chris's process, and like we said, you know, going through the setup, we'll be focusing a lot on that next week, and we'll see how it goes with live scrummaging. But thank you guys for joining us tonight. A lot of people on the call. I know this got a little. This got some sharing online, and people were really excited about having Chris in. It's a great opportunity for everybody to have him on our call, and we're very grateful for it. So appreciate everybody for joining us, and thank you to Chris.
Yeah, it'll be up online. There'll be a recording of it up online in the next couple of days. Enjoy the weekend, ref well, and I believe this was requested by Chris Pollock. We'll play this out. Good evening.